The conference room fell into an uncomfortable silence as 28-year-old Daniel Thompson stood frozen at the front of the room, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the presentation clicker. The PowerPoint slide behind him displayed impressive quarterly growth charts, but all eyes were focused on his face, flushed red with embarrassment and frustration. I think what we need to understand here is that our market penetration has... Daniel's words caught in his throat, the familiar knot of anxiety tightening as he struggled with the consonants that had plagued him since childhood. From his seat at the mahogany conference table, Regional Director Kenneth Walsh rolled his eyes dramatically and let out an audible sigh. "Oh, for crying out loud," he muttered, loud enough for the entire room to hear. The morning sun, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 32nd floor, seemed to spotlight Daniel's humiliation, as Kenneth's impatience filled the space. Daniel had been preparing for this presentation for weeks. As the lead analyst for Morrison Financial Solutions, he had compiled months of data showing how their investment strategies could help their potential new client, Riverside Community Bank, expand their services to underserved neighborhoods. The numbers were solid, the projections were promising, and the social impact could be transformative, but none of that mattered if he couldn't get the words out. Market penetration in the C community banking sector shows... Daniel tried again, his voice barely above a whisper as he felt the weight of everyone's stares. Kenneth stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. At 55, he carried himself with the arrogance of someone who had climbed the corporate ladder through intimidation rather than innovation. His expensive suit couldn't mask the cruelty in his eyes as he looked at Daniel with undisguised disgust. "This is exactly why I told HR we shouldn't put stutterers in client-facing roles," Kenneth announced to the room, his voice dripping with disdain. "How are we supposed to close deals when our presenter sounds like a broken record?" The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. Around the conference table, his colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sarah Kim, a junior analyst who had always been kind to Daniel, looked down at her notes, unable to meet his eyes. Tom Brady, the marketing director, cleared his throat nervously but said nothing. The silence from his teammates felt almost as devastating as Kenneth's public humiliation. At the far end of the table sat their potential client, 62-year-old Robert Chambers, president of Riverside Community Bank. Daniel had researched him extensively, a man who had started as a teller and worked his way up over 4 decades, known for his commitment to community development and his reputation for treating everyone with respect. Right now, Robert's weathered face showed no emotion as he observed the unfolding drama. Kenneth walked over to Daniel, close enough that only he could hear the next words. "You're embarrassing this entire company," he hissed under his breath. "Maybe you should consider a career change, something where talking isn't required." Daniel's hands were shaking now, not just from nerves, but from rage and humiliation. He had worked 18-hour days preparing for this meeting, had run the numbers dozens of times, had practiced his presentation in front of his bathroom mirror until his voice was hoarse. All of that dedication, all of that expertise reduced to nothing because of a speech impediment he couldn't control. The stuttering had been Daniel's companion since elementary school. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, he had endured years of mockery from classmates who imitated his speech patterns and teachers who lost patience with his careful, measured responses. His mother, Linda, a single parent working 2 jobs, had scraped together money for speech therapy sessions that helped but never completely eliminated the problem. The stutter became worse under stress, and right now, standing in this gleaming conference room with his career potentially hanging in the balance, Daniel felt more stressed than he had in years. "Perhaps," Robert Chambers finally spoke, his deep voice cutting through the tension, "we could take a short break. I'd like to discuss a few preliminary questions with my team before we continue." Kenneth immediately brightened, seeing this as validation of his harsh assessment. "Of course, Mr. Chambers," I completely understand. Maybe I should take over the presentation from here. Actually, Robert interrupted, his steel-grey eyes fixed on Kenneth with an intensity that made the regional director take a step back. I was hoping to continue with Mr. Thompson. His analysis of our community development needs was quite thorough in the preliminary materials. I'd like to hear more of his insights. Daniel felt a spark of hope, but Kenneth's face darkened. Mr. Chambers, I appreciate your patience, but as you can see, Mr. Thompson has some communication challenges that might impede. The only communication challenge I'm observing, Robert said, his voice remaining calm but carrying an unmistakable edge, is someone interrupting their colleague and creating a hostile work environment. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kenneth's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, clearly not accustomed to being challenged, especially in front of a client. Sarah Kim looked up from her notes with barely concealed surprise, while Tom Brady suddenly found his water glass fascinating. Daniel stood there, caught between gratitude for Robert's intervention and mortification at becoming the center of this confrontation. He had dreamed of this moment, presenting to a major client, showcasing his analytical skills, proving that his stutter didn't define his professional capabilities. Instead, he found himself at the center of a workplace drama that could end his career at Morrison Financial Solutions. Robert Chambers stood up slowly, his 6-foot frame commanding attention without raising his voice. Mr. Thompson, would you mind walking me through your analysis of the demographic trends in our target communities? I'm particularly interested in your methodology for projecting growth in the micro-business lending sector. The question was exactly what Daniel had hoped to discuss. The heart of his research, the area where his expertise shone brightest. But his throat felt tight, his confidence shattered by Kenneth's public humiliation. He looked at the expectant faces around the table, knowing that his response could determine not just this deal, but his entire future at the company. Taking a deep breath, Daniel clicked to the next slide, showing detailed demographic maps of Riverside's service area. The D data shows that micro-businesses in these C communities have been underserved by traditional lending institutions, he began, his voice gaining strength as he focused on the substance rather than his delivery. Our P projections indicate that with the right outreach programs, Riverside could capture approximately 30% of this market within 18 months. Robert nodded encouragingly, leaning forward with genuine interest. What metrics did you use to arrive at that projection? Daniel felt his confidence building as he moved into his area of expertise. The numbers had always been his sanctuary. In the world of data and analysis, his stutter couldn't diminish the accuracy of his insights or the thoroughness of his research. We analyzed C-comparable markets in Cleveland and Cincinnati, adjusting for demographic variables and C-competitive landscape. The correlation between community investment and loan portfolio growth shows a clear P pattern. Kenneth, clearly frustrated by the direction of the conversation, interrupted again. Mr. Chambers, while we appreciate your patience, perhaps we should focus on the bigger picture rather than getting bogged down in... Mr. Walsh, Robert's voice cut through the interruption like a blade. I'm finding Mr. Thompson's analysis quite valuable. Perhaps you could allow him to finish? The rebuke was polite but unmistakable. Kenneth's face flushed red, and Daniel could practically see the steam rising from his boss's collar. Around the table, the other Morrison employees exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the tension, but unable to intervene. Daniel continued his presentation, and with each slide, each data point, each carefully researched projection, his voice grew steadier. Robert asked thoughtful questions, engaged with the details, and treated Daniel's insights with the respect they deserved. For 20 minutes, the conference room became what Daniel had always imagined it could be, a space where ideas mattered more than delivery, where substance trumped style. But Kenneth's patience had run out. As Daniel concluded his analysis of the community impact projections, his boss stood up abruptly. "I think we've covered enough of the technical details," Kenneth announced, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Let me walk you through our standard service packages and fee structures." "Actually," Robert said, closing his leather portfolio with a decisive snap, "I think I have everything I need for now." Kenneth's face lit up with what he clearly thought was victory. "Excellent. Shall we move to contract discussions?" Robert stood up, buttoning his navy blue suit jacket with deliberate precision. "I'll need to discuss this proposal with my board, of course, but I want to be clear about something." He paused, his grey eyes sweeping the room before settling on Kenneth. "In 40 years of banking, I've learned that character reveals itself in how people treat those they perceive as vulnerable. What I witnessed here today tells me everything I need to know about the culture at Morrison Financial Solutions." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel felt his heart sink, certain that Kenneth's behavior had cost them the deal. All of his hard work, all of his careful analysis, wasted because of his boss's cruelty and impatience. Robert walked around the table to where Daniel stood, extending his hand. "Mr. Thompson, your analysis was thorough, insightful, and exactly what we need to make an informed decision. I hope you'll consider joining us for a follow-up meeting next week." Daniel shook his hand, still processing what had just happened. "Thank you, Mr. Chambers. I'd be honored to continue our discussion." As Robert headed toward the door, Kenneth scrambled to salvage the situation. "Mr. Chambers, please don't let this misunderstanding affect your decision about our partnership. I assure you, Morrison Financial Solutions maintains the highest standards of professionalism." Robert paused at the doorway, turning back with the expression that could have frozen fire. "Mr. Walsh, professionalism isn't about maintaining appearances. It's about treating people with dignity and respect. Today, only one person in this room demonstrated those qualities." With that, Robert Chambers walked out, leaving behind a conference room full of stunned silence and one regional director whose face had gone from red to pale white in the span of 30 seconds. Daniel began gathering his presentation materials with shaking hands, unsure whether he had just witnessed his career's greatest triumph or its final disaster. Around the table, his colleagues avoided eye contact, the weight of what they had witnessed and their own silence during it hanging heavy in the air. Kenneth stood at the head of the table, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume, his authority diminished by Robert's quiet dignity and firm rebuke. The morning sun continued streaming through the windows, but the light seemed different now, less forgiving, more revealing. As Daniel headed toward the door, Sarah Kim finally spoke up. "That was really impressive research, Daniel. Your demographic analysis was spot on. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it meant everything." Daniel nodded his thanks and left the conference room, knowing that whatever happened next, something fundamental had shifted. The question was whether that shift would destroy his career or transform it. Walking down the hallway toward his cubicle, Daniel could hear Kenneth's voice through the closed conference room door, likely attempting damage control with his remaining team. But Robert Chambers was gone, taking with him not just a potential client relationship, but Daniel's faith that merit could overcome prejudice in the corporate world. Daniel sat down at his desk, staring at his computer screen without really seeing it. Around him, the open office buzzed with its usual activity, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the low hum of professional conversations. But he felt isolated, marked by the morning's humiliation and uncertain about what consequences awaited him. His phone buzzed with a text message from his mother in Ohio. "How did the big presentation go, sweetheart? I'm so proud of you." Daniel stared at the message for a long moment, unsure how to respond. How could he explain what had happened? How could he tell her that all those years of speech therapy, all those nights of practicing in front of mirrors, all those small victories over his stutter meant nothing when faced with a boss who saw his speech impediment as a character flaw? Before he could formulate a response, his desk phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number with a local area code. "Daniel Thompson speaking," he answered, his voice still carrying the careful cadence he used when he wasn't sure how his speech would cooperate. "Mr. Thompson, this is Robert Chambers. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Daniel's heart jumped. "Of course, Mr. Chambers. How can I help you?" "First, I want to apologize for what you experienced in that meeting. No professional should have to endure that kind of treatment, especially in front of a client." "Thank you," Daniel managed, surprised by the unexpected kindness. "I appreciate that." "I'm calling because I want to make you an offer," Robert continued. "Riverside Community Bank is looking for a senior analyst to head up our community development lending division. Based on your presentation today, not just the quality of your analysis, but your commitment to understanding our mission, I think you might be exactly what we need." Daniel nearly dropped the phone. I'm sorry, are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an opportunity," Robert clarified. "The position comes with a 20% salary increase over your current role, full benefits, and the chance to make a real difference in communities that have been overlooked by traditional banking. More importantly, you'd be working for an organization that values substance over style, where your contributions would be measured by results, not by how smoothly you deliver them." The cubicle walls around Daniel seemed to fade away as the magnitude of this opportunity sank in. A chance to escape Kenneth's toxic leadership, to work on projects that aligned with his values, to be valued for his expertise rather than judged for his stutter. "I'm very interested," Daniel said, his voice stronger than it had been all morning. "When would you want to discuss details?" "How about lunch tomorrow? There's a small cafe called the Garden Gate on Elm Street. Do you know it?" Daniel smiled for the first time that day. "I'll be there." After hanging up, he sat back in his chair, trying to process the dramatic turn his day had taken. In the span of 2 hours, he had experienced professional humiliation and an unexpected opportunity that could change his entire career trajectory. His computer chimed with an email from Kenneth Walsh. The subject line read, "Meeting today, 3 p.m., mandatory." Daniel's brief moment of elation faded as he realized the day was far from over. Kenneth would undoubtedly want to discuss the morning's events, and Daniel doubted it would be a pleasant conversation. The regional director's authority had been challenged in front of a client, and men like Kenneth rarely let such slights go unpunished. Looking around the office, Daniel noticed that several colleagues were glancing in his direction before quickly looking away. Word was already spreading about the confrontation in the conference room. By the end of the day, everyone in the office would know about Kenneth's public mockery and Robert Chambers' defense of Daniel. Sarah Kim appeared at his cubicle entrance, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said, offering him one of the cups. "Thanks." Daniel accepted the coffee gratefully. "I appreciate it." "For what it's worth," Sarah said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one could overhear, "what Kenneth did in there was completely out of line. Your analysis was brilliant, and anyone with half a brain could see that." "Unfortunately, half a brain might be giving Kenneth too much credit," Daniel replied, surprised by his own boldness. Sarah actually laughed at that. "Be careful with that meeting this afternoon. Kenneth looked pretty angry when he left the conference room." Daniel nodded, already dreading the 3 o'clock confrontation. But for the first time in his career at Morrison Financial Solutions, he didn't feel completely powerless. Robert Chambers had seen his worth, had recognized his expertise, and had offered him a way out of this toxic environment. The afternoon passed slowly, each glance at the clock reminding Daniel of the approaching meeting with Kenneth. He tried to focus on his regular work, but his mind kept drifting between the morning's humiliation and the unexpected phone call that had followed. The possibility of leaving Morrison Financial Solutions, of working for someone who valued his contributions, felt both thrilling and terrifying. At exactly 3 o'clock, Daniel knocked on Kenneth's office door. The regional director's corner office was a monument to ego, awards and certificates covering the walls, expensive artwork carefully positioned to impress, and a massive desk that seemed designed to intimidate visitors. "Come in and close the door," Kenneth commanded, without looking up from his computer. Daniel entered and took a seat in one of the uncomfortable chairs facing Kenneth's desk. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the office, creating an appropriately dramatic backdrop for what Daniel knew would be an unpleasant conversation. Kenneth finally looked up, his eyes cold and calculating. "That was quite a performance this morning, Thompson." "I was just doing my job," Daniel replied, keeping his voice as steady as possible. "Your job is to represent this company professionally," Kenneth shot back. "Stammering and stumbling through presentations is not professional. It's embarrassing." Daniel felt his anger rising, but he forced himself to remain calm. "My analysis was thorough and accurate. Mr. Chambers seemed satisfied with the content." "Chambers is being polite," Kenneth dismissed. "No serious businessman wants to work with someone who can't even speak properly. You cost us that deal with your little speech problem." The cruelty of the words hit Daniel like a physical blow, but something had changed since the morning. Robert Chambers had seen value in his work, had recognized his expertise, had offered him an escape from this toxic environment. For the first time in his career at Morrison Financial Solutions, Daniel didn't feel completely defenseless. "Actually," Daniel said, his voice growing stronger with each word, "Mr. Chambers called me this afternoon. He wants to schedule a follow-up meeting." Kenneth's eyes narrowed. What kind of follow-up meeting? Daniel had intended to keep Robert's job offer confidential until he had made his decision, but Kenneth's continued attacks pushed him past his limit. "The kind where he offers me a job because he values my expertise." The color drained from Kenneth's face. "You're lying." "Am I?" Daniel stood up, feeling taller than he had in months. "Maybe you should consider that your behavior this morning didn't just embarrass me, it embarrassed this entire company. And maybe, just maybe, clients notice when management treats their employees like garbage." Kenneth's mouth opened and closed, clearly struggling to process this turn of events. The idea that his actions might have consequences, that his treatment of Daniel could actually cost him something, seemed genuinely shocking to him. "If you think you can just walk away from this company," Kenneth began, his voice rising. "I can do whatever I want," Daniel interrupted, surprising himself with his own boldness. "I'm a skilled professional with a strong track record. What I don't have to do is tolerate being mocked and humiliated by someone who values cruelty over competence." With that, Daniel walked toward the door, leaving Kenneth sputtering behind his massive desk. As he reached for the door handle, Kenneth's voice followed him. "You'll never work in this industry again. I'll make sure of that." Daniel paused, his hand on the door handle. 6 months ago, that threat would have terrified him. Now, with Robert Chambers' offer in his pocket and a newfound understanding of his own worth, it just sounded pathetic. "Good luck with that, Kenneth," Daniel said without turning around. "I'm sure your reputation for professionalism will open lots of doors." He left Kenneth's office and walked back to his cubicle with his head held high for the first time in months. Around the office, colleagues watched his exit from Kenneth's office with obvious curiosity. Word would spread quickly that Daniel had stood up to the regional director and that Kenneth's usual intimidation tactics had failed. Back at his desk, Daniel opened his laptop and began composing his resignation letter. After 3 years at Morrison Financial Solutions, after enduring Kenneth's casual cruelty and the company's indifference to workplace bullying, he was finally free to leave. The letter was brief and professional, giving 2 weeks' notice and expressing gratitude for the opportunities he had been given. He didn't mention Kenneth's behavior, didn't air his grievances, didn't burn bridges that might someday need crossing again. But between the lines, anyone reading carefully would understand that he was leaving for reasons that had nothing to do with career advancement and everything to do with basic human dignity. As he prepared to send the letter to Human Resources, Daniel's phone buzzed with another text from his mother. "Still waiting to hear about that presentation. Call me when you get a chance." This time, Daniel smiled as he typed his response. "Big changes coming, Mom. I'll call you tonight with all the details." And yes, the presentation went better than expected. It wasn't a lie, exactly. The presentation itself had showcased his expertise and caught the attention of exactly the right person. The fact that it had also exposed his boss's true character was just an unexpected bonus. Daniel hit send on his resignation letter and leaned back in his chair, feeling lighter than he had in years. Tomorrow, he would meet with Robert Chambers to discuss the details of his new position. Next week, he would begin the transition away from Morrison Financial Solutions and toward an organization that valued substance over style. But right now, in this moment, he simply enjoyed the feeling of having stood up for himself, of having refused to accept that his speech impediment defined his worth or limited his potential. Around him, the office continued its usual rhythm. But Daniel was already somewhere else, already imagining a future where his expertise was valued, where his contributions mattered, and where his stutter was just one small part of who he was, rather than the thing that determined how others saw him. The afternoon sun continued streaming through the windows, but now the light felt warm and promising rather than harsh and unforgiving. Change was coming. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel Thompson was looking forward to tomorrow. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the garden gate 15 minutes early, wanting to settle his nerves before his meeting with Robert Chambers. The small cafe was exactly what he had imagined: warm lighting, comfortable seating, and the kind of atmosphere that invited genuine conversation rather than corporate posturing. Robert was already there, seated at a corner table with a cup of coffee and what appeared to be a financial newspaper folded beside his plate. He looked different outside the corporate environment, more relaxed, more approachable, but still carrying himself with the quiet dignity that had impressed Daniel during yesterday's confrontation. "Mr. Thompson," Robert stood as Daniel approached, extending his hand with a genuine smile. "Thank you for meeting me." "Thank you for the opportunity," Daniel replied, shaking his hand firmly. "And please call me Daniel." "Robert," came the reply as they both took their seats. "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of ordering us some coffee. I find these conversations go better when people are comfortable." A server appeared with a fresh cup and a small pitcher of cream, filling Daniel's cup with practiced efficiency. The simple gesture, being cared for rather than judged, felt profound after years of Kenneth's hostile work environment. "I want to start by being completely transparent with you," Robert began, stirring his coffee slowly. "What I witnessed yesterday was unconscionable. No employee should face that kind of treatment, especially during what should have been a professional presentation." Daniel felt his throat tighten slightly, the memory of Kenneth's public humiliation still fresh. "I appreciate you saying that. It wasn't my best moment." "Actually," Robert leaned forward, his grey eyes serious, "it was exactly the moment I needed to see. Not your discomfort. That was painful to witness. But your resilience, your determination to continue despite the harassment, your refusal to let someone else's behavior diminish the quality of your work." The words hit Daniel unexpectedly hard. Throughout his career, he had focused so intently on overcoming his stutter that he had rarely considered the strength it took simply to persist in environments where others saw his speech patterns as weakness. "You know," Robert continued, "my grandson has a stutter. He's 14 now, brilliant kid, wants to be an engineer. Last month he told me he was thinking about avoiding the debate team because he was worried about how he might sound. I told him the same thing I'm going to tell you. The content of what you say matters infinitely more than how smoothly you say it." Daniel felt a wave of emotion wash over him. "Not everyone sees it that way." "No, they don't," Robert agreed, "and that's their loss, not yours. In my experience, people who have had to work harder to be heard often have the most valuable things to say." They spent the next hour discussing the position at Riverside Community Bank. The role would involve developing new lending programs for underserved communities, analyzing market opportunities, and working directly with local business owners and community leaders. It was exactly the kind of work Daniel had dreamed about, meaningful, impactful, and perfectly suited to his analytical skills. The salary is $68,000 to start, Robert explained, with performance bonuses tied to the success of the programs you develop. Full benefits, 4 weeks vacation, and an educational reimbursement program if you want to pursue additional certifications or graduate work. It was a significant increase from his current salary at Morrison Financial Solutions, but more importantly, it represented a chance to work on projects that aligned with his values. Daniel had always been passionate about using financial analysis to create positive social impact, but at Morrison, those interests had been seen as secondary to generating profits for wealthy clients. "I have one question," Daniel said, setting down his coffee cup. "Why me? You could probably find analysts with more experience without—" He gestured vaguely, unable to finish the sentence. Without a stutter, Robert finished gently. "Daniel, let me tell you something. Yesterday, I watched you deliver a complex presentation under hostile conditions while maintaining your professionalism and the accuracy of your analysis. That tells me more about your character and capabilities than any smooth-talking salesperson could demonstrate in a dozen meetings." Robert pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "These are some testimonials from community leaders in neighborhoods we're hoping to serve. I showed them your demographic analysis from yesterday's presentation. They were impressed not just by the thoroughness of your research, but by the fact that you clearly understood their challenges and opportunities." Daniel opened the folder and read the brief comments. Local business owners, community center directors, and neighborhood association leaders all praised his insights and expressed hope that a bank might finally understand their needs rather than just see them as untapped markets. "They want to meet you," Robert continued, "not to judge whether you're articulate enough or polished enough, but to work with someone who actually understands their communities. That's what matters, Daniel. That's what makes a real difference." By the time they finished lunch, Daniel had accepted the position. The relief was immediate and overwhelming, not just escape from Kenneth's toxic leadership, but the promise of meaningful work with an organization that valued substance over style. "I do need to give 2 weeks' notice at Morrison," Daniel explained as they prepared to leave. "Of course," Robert nodded. "Professional courtesy matters, even when it hasn't been extended to you. Can you start the first Monday in November?" They shook hands outside the cafe, and Daniel walked back to his car feeling lighter than he had in years. The October air was crisp and clear, leaves beginning to turn colors that reminded him of new beginnings and positive change. His phone rang as he pulled into the Morrison Financial Solutions parking lot. The caller ID showed his mother's number. "Hi, Mom. Danny. I've been waiting all day to hear about your presentation." "How did it go?" Daniel paused, looking up at the glass tower that housed Morrison Financial Solutions. Yesterday morning, he had walked into that building feeling trapped and powerless. Now, just 24 hours later, everything had changed. "Mom, I got a job offer." The excitement in Linda Thompson's voice was immediate and infectious. "Danny, that's wonderful. Tell me everything." As Daniel walked across the parking lot toward the building entrance, he found himself telling his mother the whole story. Kenneth's cruelty, Robert's intervention, the job offer, and his decision to leave Morrison Financial Solutions. For the first time in years, he didn't minimize his accomplishments or downplay his expertise. "I'm so proud of you," his mother said when he finished the story. "Not just for getting the job offer, but for standing up for yourself, for recognizing that you deserve better." "It wasn't easy," Daniel admitted, pushing through the lobby doors. "For a while there, I thought Kenneth was right. I thought maybe I really wasn't cut out for client presentations." Daniel Thompson. His mother's voice carried the firm tone she had used throughout his childhood when she needed him to really listen. "You are brilliant, hard-working, and kind. Anyone who can't see that is revealing their own limitations, not yours. Daniel smiled as he waited for the elevator. Thanks, Mom. I needed to hear that. And Danny? That boss of yours, Kenneth? He sounds like a bully who's threatened by people who are smarter than he is, which, from what you've told me about your work, probably describes most of his employees. The elevator doors opened, and Daniel stepped inside, still smiling. His mother had always had a way of cutting through complexity to reach the essential truth of situations. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. Now go show them what you're made of. Daniel's afternoon at Morrison Financial Solutions passed in a blur of transition activities. He began documenting his current projects, organizing his files for whoever would take over his responsibilities, and preparing materials that would ensure a smooth handoff of his client relationships. Around the office, word had spread about his resignation. Colleagues stopped by his cubicle with a mixture of congratulations and curiosity. Sarah Kim seemed genuinely excited for his opportunity, while others appeared more interested in the gossip potential of his dramatic exit from Kenneth's office. "Is it true that you told Kenneth off?" whispered Janet from accounting, glancing around nervously as if Kenneth might materialize behind her. "I just stood up for myself," Daniel replied diplomatically. "Sometimes that's necessary." Tom Brady appeared at his cubicle around 4 o'clock, looking uncomfortable. "Daniel, I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I should have said something when he was being unprofessional." Daniel appreciated the apology, even though it came 24 hours late. "It's okay, Tom. I understand the position you were in." "No, it's not okay," Tom insisted. "We all let you down in that room. Kenneth was out of line, and we should have supported you." It was a small gesture, but it mattered. For years, Daniel had wondered if his colleagues genuinely respected his work, or if they simply tolerated his presence. Tom's apology suggested that at least some of them had recognized the quality of his contributions and the unfairness of Kenneth's treatment. At 5:30, as Daniel was preparing to leave for the day, his desk phone rang one final time. The caller ID showed Kenneth Walsh's extension. "Thompson," Kenneth's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "We need to talk." "Actually, we don't," Daniel replied calmly. "I've submitted my resignation letter to HR and begun the transition process for my current projects. Unless there's something specific about the handoff that requires my attention, I think we've said everything that needs to be said." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Kenneth spoke again, his voice different, less commanding, more desperate. "Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. Maybe I was having a bad day, came across harsher than I intended." Daniel almost laughed at the transparent attempt at damage control. Kenneth wasn't apologizing out of remorse or newfound respect. He was panicking because Daniel's resignation would require explanations to upper management, and the story of yesterday's confrontation wouldn't reflect well on his leadership. "Kenneth," Daniel said, using his boss's first name deliberately for the first time in their professional relationship. "Yesterday wasn't a misunderstanding or a bad day. It was a pattern of behavior that I'm no longer willing to accept. You're making a mistake, Thompson, walking away from a stable position, burning bridges with management. The only mistake I made," Daniel interrupted, "was tolerating your behavior for as long as I did." He hung up the phone and finished packing his personal items. Around the office, the late afternoon crowd was thinning out, but Daniel noticed several colleagues watching his conversation with obvious interest. By tomorrow morning, everyone would know that Kenneth had attempted some kind of reconciliation and that Daniel had rejected it. Walking toward the elevator, Daniel felt a sense of closure settling over him. 3 years ago, he had joined Morrison Financial Solutions with hopes of building a career in financial analysis while making a positive impact on communities through responsible lending practices. The job had provided valuable experience and decent compensation, but it had never delivered on the promise of meaningful work or respectful treatment. Now, at 28, he was finally moving toward an opportunity that aligned with his values and recognized his worth. The stutter that Kenneth had seen as a disqualifying weakness was simply part of who Daniel was. Not a limitation, but just one characteristic among many others that included analytical brilliance, dedication to his work, and commitment to using financial expertise for social good. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, Daniel thought about Robert Chambers' grandson, the 14-year-old who was considering avoiding debate team because of his stutter. Tomorrow, Daniel would send Robert a note suggesting that his grandson might benefit from knowing that stuttering doesn't have to limit anyone's professional aspirations or personal goals. The lobby was nearly empty as Daniel walked toward the exit, his box of personal items balanced in his arms. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the plaza, painting the city in warm golden light that promised better days ahead. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Daniel, this is Robert Chambers. Looking forward to working with you in November. Also wanted you to know, I just got off the phone with my grandson. He's joining the debate team next semester. Apparently, someone he's never met has inspired him to stop letting other people's limitations become his own. Thank you for that." Daniel stopped walking and read the message twice, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. Somehow, in standing up for himself, he had also stood up for a 14-year-old boy he had never met, showing him that speech impediments don't have to define potential or limit dreams. Walking out of the Morrison Financial Solutions building for the last time as an employee, Daniel felt the weight of years of anxiety and self-doubt lifting from his shoulders. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and the chance to prove that talent and dedication matter more than perfect diction. 2 weeks later, Daniel's last day at Morrison Financial Solutions arrived with the kind of crisp November morning that made everything feel possible. He had spent the previous 14 days completing his transition responsibilities with characteristic thoroughness, ensuring that his replacement would have everything needed to maintain his client relationships and ongoing projects. The office atmosphere had shifted noticeably since his resignation announcement. Colleagues who had previously maintained polite but distant relationships now approached him with genuine warmth, as if his decision to leave had given them permission to acknowledge what they had always seen, that Daniel was a valuable team member who deserved better treatment than he had received. Sarah Kim had organized a small farewell gathering in the break room, complete with cake and coffee. It wasn't elaborate, but the gesture meant more to Daniel than any corporate send-off could have. These were people who had witnessed his daily struggles with Kenneth's leadership style, who had seen him work late nights and early mornings to prove himself worthy of respect that should have been freely given. "We're really going to miss having you around," Sarah said, as they shared cake and casual conversation. "Your analysis on the Henderson project last month was brilliant. I learned more from watching your methodology than I did in my entire graduate program." Tom Brady nodded in agreement. "You set a high bar for the rest of us, Daniel. Riverside Community Bank is lucky to get you." Even Janet from accounting, who rarely ventured into workplace conversations, approached him with a shy smile. "I just wanted to say that what you did in that conference room 2 weeks ago, standing up to Kenneth, it was inspiring. A lot of us have wanted to speak up about his behavior, but we never had the courage." Daniel felt a complex mix of emotions as he listened to these farewell sentiments. Part of him was grateful for the recognition and support, but another part wondered why it had taken his resignation to prompt these conversations. How different might his experience at Morrison Financial Solutions have been if his colleagues had felt empowered to challenge Kenneth's behavior when it was happening, rather than commenting on it only after Daniel had found an escape route. Kenneth himself had been conspicuously absent from the office for most of Daniel's final 2 weeks. According to office gossip, he was spending increased time at client sites and regional meetings, possibly trying to repair relationships damaged by the incident with Robert Chambers. Daniel had heard through Sarah that Robert had indeed shared his concerns about Morrison's workplace culture with other business leaders in the community, and that several potential clients had asked pointed questions about the company's treatment of employees. At noon, Daniel cleared out the last items from his desk and said his final goodbyes. The box of personal belongings felt lighter this time, as if the decision to leave had reduced the emotional weight of everything he was carrying. Walking toward the elevator for the last time, he noticed Kenneth emerging from his office, clearly intending to intercept him. "Thompson!" Kenneth called out, his voice carrying a forced joviality that fooled no one. "Heading out to your new adventure?" Daniel paused, studying his former boss's face. Kenneth looked tired, older somehow, as if the past 2 weeks had taken a toll on him. The arrogance that had always characterized his interactions with subordinates was muted, replaced by something that might have been uncertainty. "I am," Daniel replied neutrally. "I think it's going to be a good fit." "Well," Kenneth cleared his throat, glancing around at the colleagues who were obviously listening to their exchange. "I hope there are no hard feelings. Sometimes in business, personalities clash. It doesn't mean anyone meant any harm." The non-apology was so perfectly Kenneth, acknowledging that something had happened while taking no responsibility for his role in it. Daniel felt a familiar surge of anger, but then remembered Robert Chambers' words about character revealing itself in how people treat those they perceive as vulnerable. Kenneth's inability to offer a genuine apology, even now, simply confirmed everything Daniel had learned about his character. "No hard feelings," Daniel replied, though his tone made it clear that this wasn't forgiveness, just indifference. "I hope you find what you're looking for here." With that, Daniel stepped into the elevator, leaving Kenneth standing in the open office area with a confused expression on his face. As the doors closed, Daniel caught a glimpse of his former colleagues returning to their desks. The brief drama concluded with characteristic corporate awkwardness. The elevator descended through the floors of his old professional life, carrying him away from 3 years of struggle and frustration towards something that felt like genuine possibility. When the doors opened onto the lobby, Daniel walked out without looking back. Outside, his car waited in the visitor parking area. He had turned in his employee parking pass the day before. As he loaded his belongings into the trunk, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Robert Chambers' number. "Daniel, how are you feeling about your last day?" "Relieved," Daniel answered honestly. "Ready to start something new." "Good. I wanted to call because I have a small request. We're having a community meeting tonight at the Riverside Community Center. Local business owners, neighborhood association leaders, people who represent the communities we're hoping to serve. I'd like you to attend, not in any official capacity, just to observe and introduce yourself. Would you be interested?" Daniel felt a flutter of nervousness. "Will I need to present anything? I haven't prepared." "No presentations," Robert assured him. "Just conversation. Just the chance for people to meet the person who's going to be analyzing their needs and developing programs to serve their communities." It was exactly the kind of low-pressure introduction Daniel needed. After years of formal presentations and hostile conference rooms, the idea of simply talking with people about their challenges and aspirations felt refreshing. "I'll be there," Daniel said. "What time?" 7 o'clock. "And Daniel, these are good people. They're going to appreciate having someone who actually listens to what they have to say." That evening, Daniel arrived at the Riverside Community Center 15 minutes early, wanting to get a sense of the environment before the meeting began. The building was older but well-maintained, with meeting rooms that showed signs of regular use by various community organizations. Photos on the walls displayed decades of neighborhood events, youth programs, and volunteer activities. Robert was already there, talking with a group of people who were clearly comfortable in his presence. When he spotted Daniel, he immediately walked over with a genuine smile. "Daniel, I'm so glad you could make it. Come on, let me introduce you to some folks." The next hour was unlike any professional gathering Daniel had ever experienced. Instead of formal presentations and corporate posturing, the meeting felt more like a neighborhood conversation. People shared stories about their businesses, their challenges with traditional banks, their hopes for economic development that would benefit existing residents rather than displacing them. Maria Santos, who owned a small restaurant on the main commercial strip, talked about her difficulties getting a loan to expand her kitchen and hire additional staff. The big banks, they look at our neighborhood and they see risk. They don't see 30 years of community building, families who have lived here for generations, businesses that serve as gathering places for people who look out for each other. James Wilson, who ran a small construction company specializing in home repairs for elderly residents, nodded in agreement. "I've been trying to get equipment financing for 2 years. My credit is good, my business is steady, but apparently my zip code makes me a bad investment." Daniel found himself listening with the intensity he usually reserved for financial data. These weren't abstract market segments or demographic categories. They were real people with specific needs and creative solutions that traditional banking seemed unable or unwilling to recognize. When Robert asked Daniel to share a bit about his background, he felt the familiar tightness in his throat that preceded his stutter. But somehow, in this room full of people who were focused on substance rather than style, the anxiety was manageable. "I'm a financial analyst," Daniel began, his voice steady, "and I've spent most of my C career studying how lending decisions get made and how they affect C communities. What I've learned is that traditional metrics often miss the real indicators of economic strength, things like community C connections, local knowledge, and long-term commitment to a neighborhood." Dorothy Chen, an elderly woman who had introduced herself as the president of the neighborhood association, leaned forward with interest. "So you understand that we're not asking for handouts or special treatment. We're asking for recognition that our community has assets that don't show up on standard risk assessments." "Exactly," Daniel replied, feeling more confident with each exchange. "A restaurant like Maria's isn't just a business, it's a community anchor. A construction company like James's isn't just about individual projects, it's about maintaining the housing stock that keeps neighborhoods stable." The conversation continued for another hour, covering topics from micro-business lending to community development financing to partnerships with local nonprofits. Daniel found himself taking notes, not because Robert had asked him to, but because the insights these community leaders were sharing would be invaluable in developing programs that actually met their needs. As the meeting wound down, several people approached Daniel individually to continue their conversations. Maria asked about his timeline for developing new lending programs. James wanted to know if he would be available for follow-up discussions about equipment financing. Dorothy invited him to attend the next neighborhood association meeting as a guest. "You know," Dorothy said as they prepared to leave, "we've had bank representatives come to these meetings before. Usually they spend the whole time explaining why our requests aren't feasible or why our businesses don't fit their standard criteria. You're the first one who seemed more interested in understanding our perspective than defending your institution's policies." Daniel felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the community center's heating system. For the first time in his professional life, he was being valued, not despite his careful, measured approach to communication, but because of it. His tendency to listen more than he spoke, to ask thoughtful questions rather than make assumptions, was exactly what these community conversations required. Robert drove him to the parking lot afterward, and they sat in his car for a few minutes, discussing the evening's conversations. "What did you think?" Robert asked. "I think we have an incredible opportunity," Daniel replied. "These aren't high-risk borrowers. They're underserved customers with solid business models and deep community connections. The right lending programs could strengthen the entire neighborhood economy. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd see, Robert smiled. Traditional banking looks at this community and sees limitations. I want Riverside Community Bank to look at the same community and see potential. They discussed logistics for Daniel's first week on the job, scheduled follow-up meetings with some of the business owners he had met that evening, and outlined priorities for his first month. It felt less like corporate orientation and more like collaborative planning between colleagues who shared a common vision. Driving home that night, Daniel reflected on the dramatic changes the past 2 weeks had brought to his life. A month ago, he had been trapped in a job where his stutter was seen as a professional liability and his expertise was undervalued. Tonight, he had spent 2 hours with community leaders who appreciated his analytical approach and respected his commitment to understanding their needs. His phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Kim. Saw on LinkedIn that you officially start at Riverside on Monday. So excited for you. Also wanted to let you know, Kenneth got called into a meeting with the regional VP yesterday. Word is they're reviewing his leadership approach. Guess your resignation got people's attention. Daniel smiled at the update, but found that he felt no satisfaction in Kenneth's apparent difficulties. The toxic manager's behavior had certainly deserved consequences, but Daniel's focus now was entirely on the positive opportunities ahead rather than the negative experiences behind him. Another text came through, this one from his mother. First day of your new job on Monday. I'm so proud of how you've handled this whole situation. Remember, they hired you because they recognize your talents. Now go show them what you can do. Sunday evening, Daniel prepared for his first day at Riverside Community Bank with a mixture of excitement and nervousness that felt entirely different from the anxiety that had characterized his final months at Morrison Financial Solutions. This was the nervousness of positive anticipation, the recognition that he was about to begin work that could make a real difference in people's lives. He had spent the weekend reviewing the community meeting notes, researching best practices in community development lending, and preparing questions for his initial meetings with Robert and other Riverside leadership. The thoroughness that had always characterized his work felt energizing now rather than defensive, as if his natural attention to detail was finally being channeled towards something meaningful. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Daniel dressed carefully in his best suit, not because he felt the need to prove himself through appearance, but because he wanted to honor the significance of this new beginning. Riverside Community Bank occupied a renovated historic building on the main commercial strip, very different from the glass tower that housed Morrison Financial Solutions. The lobby featured local artwork and comfortable seating areas where customers could have actual conversations rather than rushing through transactions. Even the physical space seemed designed to prioritize relationships over efficiency. Robert met him at the front desk with a warm handshake and a genuine smile. "Welcome to Riverside, Daniel. Ready to start changing some lives?" The orientation process was refreshingly straightforward. Daniel met his new colleagues, toured the facility, and received his office assignments, an actual office with a window and a door, rather than the cubicle arrangement he had endured at Morrison. The difference felt symbolic of the respect he could expect in this new environment. His direct supervisor was Linda Martinez, a 45-year-old community development specialist who had spent 20 years working with non-profit organizations before joining Riverside 2 years earlier. During their initial meeting, she outlined Daniel's responsibilities with the kind of clarity and support he had rarely experienced in his previous position. "Your primary focus will be developing lending programs for small businesses and community organizations," Linda explained. "We want you to use your analytical skills to create products that actually work for the people who need them, rather than trying to force existing products onto communities they don't serve." Daniel nodded, already envisioning the possibilities. I met several business owners at the community meeting last week. They have specific needs that seem very addressable with the right program design. Perfect, Linda smiled. Robert told me about that meeting. We want you to build on those relationships, really understand what would make the difference between a loan program that sounds good in theory and one that actually helps businesses grow. The first week at Riverside Community Bank passed quickly, filled with meetings, planning sessions, and follow-up conversations with community leaders Daniel had met at the neighborhood gathering. Each day reinforced his sense that he had found not just a job, but a professional home where his skills were valued and his stutter was simply irrelevant to his contributions. On Friday afternoon, as Daniel was preparing to leave for his first weekend as a Riverside employee, his desk phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number with a Morrison Financial Solutions prefix. Daniel Thompson. Daniel, this is Sarah Kim. I hope you don't mind me calling you at your new job. Not at all. How are things at Morrison? Interesting, Sarah replied, and Daniel could hear the smile in her voice. Kenneth got transferred to the regional office. Officially it's a promotion, but everyone knows it's really removing him from day-to-day management. Tom Brady is taking over as interim regional director. Daniel felt a complex mix of emotions, satisfaction that Kenneth's behavior had finally faced consequences, but also recognition that systemic change required more than just removing one problematic manager. How's Tom handling the transition? Daniel asked. Much better than expected. He called a staff meeting yesterday to discuss workplace culture and professional standards. Actually asked for feedback about how to make the environment more supportive for everyone. It was progress, Daniel acknowledged, though he wondered if these changes would have happened without his resignation serving as a catalyst. Sometimes institutional improvement required someone to be willing to walk away, to demonstrate that talented people wouldn't tolerate toxic leadership indefinitely. I'm happy for everyone there, Daniel said sincerely. Tom's a good person. He deserves the chance to lead. We all know your leaving was the wake-up call that made this happen, Sarah continued. I wanted to thank you for having the courage to stand up for yourself. It made a difference for all of us. After hanging up, Daniel reflected on the unexpected ripple effects of his decision to leave Morrison Financial Solutions. He had left primarily to escape Kenneth's toxic leadership and pursue meaningful work at Riverside. But apparently, his departure had also contributed to positive changes for the colleagues he had left behind. His computer chimed with an email from Robert Chambers. Daniel, wanted you to know that I got a call today from Maria Santos. She's ready to move forward with her restaurant expansion loan application. Says she's never felt more confident about working with a bank. Great job building those relationships. Reading the email, Daniel felt the deep satisfaction that comes from work that aligns with personal values. Maria's restaurant expansion would create jobs, serve as a community gathering place, and demonstrate that careful analysis could reveal opportunities where others saw only risks. The November sun was setting as Daniel prepared to leave his office for the weekend. Through his window, he could see the main commercial strip where many of his new clients operated their businesses. Next week would bring new challenges, new opportunities to develop creative financing solutions, and new chances to prove that banking could be a force for community development rather than just profit maximization. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. How was your first week at the new job? Daniel smiled as he typed his response. Mom, I think I finally found where I belong. Walking out of Riverside Community Bank that Friday evening, Daniel felt a sense of completeness that had been missing from his professional life for years. The stutter that Kenneth had seen as a disqualifying weakness was simply part of who he was. Not a limitation, but just one characteristic among many others that included analytical brilliance, dedication to meaningful work, and commitment to treating all people with dignity and respect. The evening air carried the scent of autumn leaves and the promise of positive changes ahead. In his briefcase, Daniel carried notes from community meetings, loan applications from local businesses, and project plans that could strengthen entire neighborhoods. It was exactly the kind of work he had always dreamed of doing. Behind him, the lights in Riverside Community Bank's windows cast a warm glow onto the sidewalk, inviting passers-by to imagine a different kind of banking, one where community development mattered as much as profit margins, where customer relationships were built on mutual respect, and where talented employees were valued for their contributions rather than judged for characteristics beyond their control. As Daniel drove home, he thought about Robert Chambers' grandson, the 14-year-old who had decided to join the debate team despite his stutter. Someday, Daniel hoped, he might have the chance to tell that young man that speech impediments don't have to limit dreams or define potential, that with the right environment and support, anyone can find where they belong and make a meaningful contribution to their community. The future felt bright and full of possibility, and for the first time in years, Daniel Thompson was exactly where he was supposed to be. If this story moved you or reminded you of your own experiences with workplace challenges, please consider sharing it with others who might benefit from Daniel's journey. Your support helps us continue creating content that celebrates resilience, dignity, and the power of standing up for what's right. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories about people who refuse to let others define their worth or limit their potential.